I am one of the few members that have been both part of the original Fractal Tribe and the Fractal Tribe that came to be. And some of you don't know the history enough to even know there were two of us, two of Fractal Tribes. And so Fractal Tribe, what it is now, it's a small production company, and we do corporate event, like small local corporate events. We do a lot of festivals, some of them international, and we do amateur shows like at the dairy. Some of them are here. In some ways, we're very small. There's 5 or 6 of us that do a lot of the grunt work, and there's like 30 or 40 of us that are kind of loosely involved in some way. That's kind of, if you don't know who we are, this is if you see this, that means it's a Fractal Tribe production. That's kind of that's what we do. That's not really who we are. You know, we're here to talk about human beings, not human doings. And so I'm going to tell you a little about the history of where it came from, because that's where I really have the most knowledge. The reality is that no one really knows what Fractal Tribe is right now, because no one holds that vision. We all hold it collectively. But I can tell you about the history, because I know that much. So in 2006, there was a show that we did called Ratuva. And Ratuva pulled performers from aircat, aerial arts, and airspace, acrobatics, some dancers from frequent flyers. There was the music company called Red Penguin Records. There was, we really pulled so many of the different organizations that typically worked independently together for one show. And when we were trying to come up with what we were going to do with it. It was Darden, Sven, and I that were leading that up. We wanted a name that would reflect what we were, that wasn't going to be something that assimilated all of the other organizations, but is something slightly different. So we took this idea of the different types of drumming styles that we were kind of thinking of at the time. Like if you have a bunch of drummers and they get together, there's, on the one hand, you have something that's kind of like marching drums, and you have the other side more like a drum circle. And marching drums, you have super strict. You show up this time, you do this part, step, dang, and everything has to be perfect on time, and someone's telling you, no, you did it wrong, you were off time, you have to do it this way. That's what we didn't want. That's what we saw in the world, that's what we thought didn't work. What we wanted was something, yeah, if you want to show up with your drum, come with your drum. I'm not going to tell you what to play, but if you ask me how to play your drum, I'll share with you my knowledge. You can play it however you want. You can bring any drum you want. I'm not sure how many of you guys have been to drum circle. It's super liberating in that way. You essentially can't do anything wrong. I mean, you can make it sound terrible, and people will look snarky at you, but you just generally strive to do the best you can, and every drum circle I've been in, that is always good enough. That's what we were looking for. Something that reminded us, of that analogy of a tribal drumming circle. So we knew the tribe was this thing that was important to us. The other thing that we knew was that instead of assimilating, what we wanted to do was take the ways in which people interact with each other and apply that on a higher level. And by that I mean, when I interact with someone, I'm friendly, I'm compassionate, I try to have sympathy. And typically, when you take that person and put them in charge of a business, they start saying things like, it's not personal, it's just business. That's what we were trying to avoid. We want businesses to have compassion. We want organizations to be able to be sympathetic to other organizations. This is something that's, at least at the time, we found was just ruining our country. I mean, it's ruining the planet. When you take the most powerful things in the world and you make them necessarily have no compassion, well, that's where we live. That's some of the problems we have. So we wanted to find some other way, I mean, who the hell knows, right? Of making it so that we could take those type of interactions and map them onto how organizations deal with each other. They could form bigger organizations, that those could interact with each other. What we thought of as like this fractalized pattern of compassionate organization. And that's where the name came from. It became Fractal Tribe. You take the tribal values of drummer circle and you kind of apply them fractally, regardless of how large your group gets. Anyway, so we did that show. Ratuva was great. We did a lot of crazy, innovative things. I mean, this is 2006, and we had an electronic band before that term even existed. We had these crazy EL costumes. When you couldn't buy EL hardware, I had to wire them all myself. Anyway, enough about that particular show. Actually, I'm going to go back to 2002. I know I already stepped back. I'm going to go back a little more. So 2002, I couldn't sleep. really couldn't sleep. I was sleeping about 12 or 14 hours a week, and as Dave Crosser can attest, I would sleep sporadically. It wasn't like it's time to go to bed now. I would just be walking and be like, oh no, it's time, and then I would just fall asleep in the studio while we were recording. It happened. What kept me up at night was, in huge part, was this concept I later termed the garden. And the garden is, in my opinion, the thing that Ayn Rand wrote about in Atlas Shrugged. She called it Galt's Gulch, and Heinlein wrote about as the church of all worlds. It's the thing, I think, that led to Black Rock City. It's what Google Campus is. It's the thing that we all, as artists and creators, and I use artists very liberally, but people who want to create things, it's the place that we imagine that we can go, where we're not judged for what we create. You just get to freely create the thing that you know in your heart is good. We all want this. I mean, it's the reason why it keeps coming up in so many different themes in so many different ways. And so I started to become obsessed with, why don't we just live there? Why do we live in this other place? Why do we live in a world where we're afraid of people taking advantage of us, of trying to take our money or our lover or whatever it is that we're afraid of, or maybe it's just we're afraid of who we are? I didn't know. But I think that we all know, actually. The reason why we're afraid of that is because that's kind of where we live. That's business as usual. Someone trying to take advantage of your situation. If they have the upper hand, they're going to use it. That's the culture we live in. That's why we live there. You can't not live there. It's like a fish trying to not live in water. It doesn't really work. So, there's a lot of evidence for the type of organizations that will take advantage of those situations. My favorite one being ASCAP, and it's I want to make sure I got this right, American Society of Composers and Publishers. It is the thing that owns the rights for almost all the music in this country. And it sounds lovely, I think. I mean, that's American Society. It's like, it's a bunch of musicians. We love music. That sounds great. The problem is ASCAP has almost no musicians in it. It is the largest employer of lawyers in the country. It's a music organization. And in my opinion, it has nothing to do with music. The reason why ASCAP exists is to stand in between the person who loves music, the person who loves creating music, so that they can block the flow of funding, they can extract as much as they can, because they know that you love music enough that you won't care, and you love music enough that you won't care. And that's the world we live in, where people try to take advantage of the things that you love, the people who love creating them. And so there was that very thing that led Dave Crotzer and I, who found something called Red Penguin Records. Red Penguin Records was the hope. At the time, I didn't really know about ASCAP. This was something I learned later. But what I thought it was is that there were record labels that were trying to control people who created music, blah, 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 and we were trying to create some sort of autonomy. This is a world where a bunch of the digital gear started to just come out, so recording equipment became much cheaper. It became really easy to do things like make your own cables, et cetera, et cetera. We thought that we could create a situation where you, as a musician, didn't need the label, then you could create the music that you wanted, and the world would be saved from ASCAP. This turned out to not really work out the way I was hoping. And as it turns out, many of the musicians out there are more interested in being famous than creating something that they are proud of and that they love, at least that's what I have discovered through that experience. But in this whole process, I met some people in the circus community. Most notably Sven was the first, and followed by Chris Clark and Ian, as a slew of others, Kathy being one of the ones that really influenced my experience and my involvement. And here's a place where I found people who weren't that interested in fame. I mean, literally, I think that they ended up in circus by sitting in a room by themselves doing something kind of ridiculous over and over and over until it was perfect. And then kind of went, as Sven has alluded to, what do I do with this? is this going to benefit the world? Like, in what way? Like, how am I serving the greater community? But the part that I got really hooked into was that they were so in touch with the things that they internally thought were important and beautiful, regardless of what the external society thought. Like, does walking on a globe, and if I told my dad I could do that, is he going to be proud? I don't know. It seems like a lot of circus performers are just above that. And I don't use that term lightly. It's very important to me that you can take your own personal value system and make it more important than how you think people will judge you. Anyway, so that's how we created Fractal Tribe the first time. But like many things, we all had our own personal lives. I got injured. People moved. Fractal Tribe kind of fell apart. Fast forward to 2012, and you have a group called Circus of Illumination, Jasmine, and then there was another one called Vicinity, which was headed by Ian and Kathy, and then there was Circle Apocalypto, and blah, 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 blah. It's all the same group of circus people performing under different names, which is kind of what we had before. And the conversation came up about how we were going to deal with that. And we had hoped to not create yet again another new name, but use one that has some historical significance to this community, and that turned out to be Fractal Tribe. So that's how Fractal Tribe 2 got its name. But I have a lot of history with what I want to create my communities like, and I feel very strongly that we have all attracted to each other because we have a very similar value system. And I think it has to do with the garden. This idea that we can create a place where we don't have to be afraid of what we create, of what people will think of us when we create the things we love. That we can follow our passions in a way that we can be safe. We can create that culture, we can create that community. We're taking great strides to make this happen with Fractal Tribe. I mean, not just from an attitude of like, hey, good job, man, I like that. But we're creating a set of governance documentation that is trying its hardest to prevent groupthink, to allow for a mutually owned budget to get approved without the necessity of voting, which I think can lead to politicking, and takes the personal responsibility, takes people's natural tendency for personal responsibility to power the decision-making process. There's lots of other things that we're trying to implement at this point. The community garden was heavily supported by Fractal Tribe, and part of that has to do with the idea that there's this tendency to think of success being matched to money, and we're trying to break that down a little bit. It doesn't have to be about money. I mean, all the money that you make really should be going back into the thing that you love. And if you can just get the thing that you love and have all your needs met, you don't really need the money to go into it. And one of the big values that we're working on now is trying to break this idea that your value to your community is directly proportional to how much money you can extract from that community, which seems to be the standard way in which we think of what success means. And the big thing about this space and how Fractal Tribe works is that our main focus is how to create resources that are shared. We're hoping to think about how we use our resources less in monetary value and more in how do we expand the resources that we have and how sharing it makes more for everyone. So that's where we are with Fractal Tribe. That's what Fractal Tribe is. I don't have a good parting statement. I've thought about it for a long time.
I'd be curious to throw at least one question at you, and maybe some other folks have questions as well. But at one point in your talk there, you mentioned that you thought, through your experience with Red Penguin Records, you gained an insight into the music industry and that more musicians were interested in being famous than especially creating work that they really valued for the sake of the work itself. And I would love to hear you elaborate on that, and specifically, do you think that's really the case, or do you think it's the case that my supposition would be the musicians who get famous, who are willing to slog through and deal with the agents or whatever they have to do to get to the top, you know, take on pop songs that maybe they don't actually like that much, but they know are going to be a chart topper, that those musicians have that attitude. And I mean, my suspicion would be that there's a huge pool of music lovers out there who love to create music, who we'll never know about because they don't give a rat's hiney about being famous. And so I'd be curious just to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that. How many people, musicians, you really think are gunning for fame versus how many really care about their work?
So I mean, so the real issue behind Red Penguin was that as what we slowly started to become was a booking agency. And we were doing the booking for 3 venues in Denver and I think 7 venues in Boulder. I think it's about right. We were hiring and managing about 400 musicians at our peak. And in that time, the thing that I started to realize was that the musicians that really did care about music were terrible performers. And the people that we were really pushing because they sold shows didn't care about music. They cared about performing. And so that was where the schism happened. And I agree, there actually are plenty of musicians that love music. They're just not the ones that make it. And that's where this, I personally didn't know how to restructure Red Penguin to support the ones who really cared about the music. And it comes down in many ways to what is it you're selling? What is the business? I mean, so many of these concerns that I have and the issues that I have with how things are run comes down to business as usual. How do you create a product? How do you sell a product? How do you trick people into thinking they want it? All those issues are ones that are very challenging to overcome. And that's really what killed Red Penguin.
And do you feel like, are you guys, with that awareness in Fractal Tribe, are you working to avoid a similar situation with the various artists who are kind of being drawn into the community?
We are. Mostly it has more to do with, I think it has a lot to do with the way in which we are tied into education now. Me personally, and the Fractal Tribe as a whole, is really excited about trying to marry, for instance, the Fractal Tribe Skillshare and the Fractal Tribe Critiques into Cirque Array and the scholarship program offered by the BCC. And I think by trying to tie ourselves more into education and more into how people think of how to create art and how to keep it from becoming overtaken by the seduction of financial success, that we will hold our value where our moral compass will always point north. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, totally. And anyone else having questions? Anything anyone wants to have elaborated on?
What do you see as the kind of 5-year, 10-year kind of plan or development of Fractal Tribe?
Well, I see Fractal Tribe going in a couple different directions. Hopefully, we're getting a broader scope of it. But there is the taking care of our own mentality that is happening. I really want to have the garden project be successful and more have a little more focus on it, or I guess really just success. I want to produce more food. I'd love to have it integrate a little more things like robotics, getting some of the creativity from that culture involved into this mix. I'd love to see us have a community freezer that has wild game in it from people who went hunting for it. I mean, there's a lot of directions you can go with that, and so there's that, and I also that's really kind of calling upon how do we live, like where's the practice of life. I'd love to see that expand. So that just really has to do with the growing of food. Then there's like the sharing of the food, there's the cooking of the food, there's the yoga practice, meditation, there's sharing space. And, there's all of that kind of wrapped up in that part. And then I really want to see there be this music project that happens that is really focused on like doing music festival, things like that. That's obviously a completely different thing, animal, and that can be started. Well, I guess we've started most of these, but so I'd like to see that sort of thing happen. I'd like for that project to take on a slightly different flavor than how most music project goes. Most music projects are this tight little, really woven together family that it's hard for outsiders to deal with. I mean, there's a couple of exceptions. String cheese is kind of not like that in the sense that they always have guest performers, and those guest performers seem like they gel really well. But I'd like to see something that's a little more like how Middle Eastern groups work, where people kind of come in and out. It has to do with how you